Here we go. Hello everybody, welcome to another evening of Gŵyl Festival. Tonight I am particularly, I know I say this every time I introduce, particularly excited, but I am particularly excited. I have the lovely Georgia Winstone with me tonight. Hello! Georgia is a journalist for Wales Arts Review and a former colleague of mine, and she taught me a lot about Welsh women's literature. So when she did her masters, she ended up focusing on Welsh literature and then specifically Welsh women's writing. And being a festival set in South Wales, I felt like this was a really, really important thing to talk about and to bring home. And I thought Georgia would be the best person to help us do that. So welcome.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
So how did you come to study Welsh women's writing in particular? And I was wondering if you want to say a little bit about what the scene looks like and how what some sort of big themes are maybe in it.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I'm from Pidgin in South Wales originally, and I went to York to study for my undergrad. And throughout that, their sort of ethos is you study every sort of literature, and it gave me a brilliant sort of global view of literature. But then it wasn't until I was writing my dissertation excuse me, and I realised I wanted to focus more on Welsh literature, and I wrote about the medieval Mabinogi. And then I was coming towards the end of that, and that's when I decided to do a master's, wanting to sort of specialise a bit more and do more Welsh writing. And then I came to Cardiff and was able to sort of just re-immerse myself in just Welsh culture and literature, and it was wonderful. And then primarily it was a lot through speaking with my tutor, who became my dissertation tutor, Katie Gramich. She writes a lot about Welsh women's writing and sort of Welsh femininity, if that's the right word, Welsh womanhood, perhaps is better. So I sort of wanted to bring together my interest in Welsh writing and Welsh culture, but then also just feminism, and just, it wasn't this, a lot of Welsh culture seems to involve rugby players and, you know, coal mines and singing, and it's beautiful and wonderful, but it's very male, and it's primarily very white, and it just isn't the Wales that actually exists. And obviously those stories need to be told, but there are a lot more voices that need to be heard. And yeah, so I just wanted to sort of slot myself into the sort of Welsh feminist writers, very small academic field.
Absolutely, I can't think of it. And it's essentially, I remember you talking to me about it, it's really small, like it is really underrepresented in academia and studies in general. What did you actually end up writing your postgrad dissertation on, and what did you focus on?
Yeah, so it is very small. You know, Katie Gramich, my supervisor, has now retired, so it is even smaller. And every time I was researching, the same names were coming up, you know, brilliant academics, but it was the same people coming up all the time. And I eventually I sort of focused on one character from the Mabinogi, Blodeuwedd, this one character who's made from flowers and turns into a woman. And then I wrote about sort of how she is portrayed in the original medieval, but it's her that has been retold throughout the centuries, and particularly in the 20th century and a bit recently as well. And she's just held up as this sort of symbol of Welsh womanhood sometimes, which is very complex and a bit, you know, problematic at times, because she is a murderer. She is a very complex person, but it's just interesting that it is this very old fictional person who is used to portray Welsh womanhood. I think that's very interesting. Usually portrayed by men as well, and she's made by a man as a wife for another man, and it's all very complicated. But yeah, I looked at that, it was very interesting.
It's the male aspect of what you're talking about I really relate to, and in particular sort of the way that Welshness happens to have I don't know how what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say it's very male and it's also not very Welsh. So, you know, and there's elements of that in that, like, in neither of us are fluent Welsh speakers. You're much better than I am, and I grew up literally on the border. Like, the border is a 15-minute walk away. You can tell by my accent, not the Welshest bit of Wales. But even sort of these classics of Welsh literature, sort of more modern than the Mabinogi, not that, you know, not I didn't. So even when you've got sort of like How Green Is My Valley, I remember you telling me last year, so How Green Is My Valley is a pretty, like, it's not a bilingual book, but there is like a lot of Welsh used in it. You know, some sentences are not translated. You're expected to know what they mean, and there's you know, there's just a lot of like colloquial Welsh, not dissimilar to the experience growing up in Wales. And he wrote it, so it's a story of a coal mining and like one of the slag heaps collapsing, and all of it's sort of like a typical Welsh story. And it's held up as this narrative of Welsh Valley and changing times, and he focuses on a child at school not being able to speak Welsh, and that sort of being drilled out of them, and English being superior, and then talks about the coal mining and all this interesting stuff, and it's portrayed as like his experience growing up, and it wasn't his experience growing up, was it? So
I think that's really interesting, because talked about it a lot at university, that the story isn't, you know, because he was English and because it wasn't true, it doesn't completely undermine the themes and what he talks about. I will admit I've never actually read it because I was told of the fraud. So I sort of, on principle, was like, well, I don't want to, you know, lend my time to something that is trying to portray their own English perception of Wales and Welshness. When there are so many brilliant Welsh writers who can talk about their own experience. And it's not, from what I've heard, it is not inaccurate. You know, I've had tutors tell me that it is a good book and it is well representative of some people's lives in Wales, but then it can't be ignored that it was, you know, an Englishman of Welsh descent, you know, his surname is Llewellyn, but it does sort of make you wonder about English perceptions of Wales as well, and how we're viewed outside of Wales. And that was something I found really interesting, moving from South Wales to York and living there for 3 years for my undergrad, that, you know, I suddenly became very aware of being Welsh and sort of perceptions of Wales from outside Wales. You know, obviously I knew about, sort of taught about the Welsh Not and all of these things to do with the Welsh language that are really important to Welsh history. But then talking to people, they would either have this perception that everyone in Wales spoke Welsh, and it was just all, you know, everyone spoke Welsh, could barely speak English. And then I had some people say, well, you know, I didn't think anyone ever really spoke Welsh. I'm like, well, no, of course they did. Everyone spoke Welsh once. It's just the sort of the snippets of Welsh history that the English people that I met got. And it was just so interesting to see how people viewed Wales outside of the country. It's really fascinating.
I entirely agree. Like, English people don't know anything about Wales. Like, genuinely know nothing, because I was in Leeds, so we had similar experience. Yeah, moving from South Wales, isn't it?
So
we had literally the same experience moving from South Wales, and Bridgend isn't very far away. Family in Bridgend, and and then moving to the north, nobody really, like, you know, not like, obviously that's like extreme, but definitely there are differences you don't realise growing up, because obviously, like, with devolution and with our schooling being different and with elements of that, and it's like we didn't have all the same reference points for schooling. My favourite story is, you know, WJC, which is the Welsh Exam Board. Yeah. I had somebody at uni tell me that it was Wujek Kebab.
I had the same. That's so funny. They were trying to say, no, it's like, it's a Welsh word. It's Wujek. I was like, no, it's not. It's really not. It's so funny. Oh, that's funny that we had that as well.
Amazing. Anyway, let's move on to what we do want to focus on, and what we do want to focus on, and which is amplifying Welsh women's voices. So do you have any books that you'd like to talk about today with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So the one I'd really like to focus on is Pidgin by Alice Conrad. It came out in 2016. And it's really interesting because it's similar to what you were saying about How Green Was My Valley, that Alice Conrad wrote it in English, but there were a lot of sentences and sort of snippets in Welsh, as the characters primarily do speak Welsh, and that's their first language. It's set in North Wales, sort of former industrial mining, slate mining town. And it's just really interesting because I read it at university first, and I was talking to another person in my seminar class who was English, and she was saying how, you know, she didn't understand the Welsh part, she didn't understand so many of the references, and it was just one of the few times that I'd read something and I had understood the Welsh. I had understood, you know, some of the references. Obviously the experiences of living in North Wales and South Wales were very different, but it was just so interesting to read something and think, oh, this is actually for me, this is for my experience. You know, so often I'll read something, or you're watching something on TV and they mention Wales, and it's like, oh, Wales is mentioned. Oh, it's like, this is really exciting. So to have something that was Welsh and specifically for a bilingual nation was really interesting. And the fact that it was, so Alice Conrad wrote it in English, though she is a Welsh speaker. It was translated by Sian Northy and into Welsh, which was apparently very difficult, obviously, because, you know, you've got a bilingual book. How do you translate that into Welsh? It's very complicated, but it still has the same very interesting themes. It's a very dark book. It's very funny. It's very interesting. But yeah, they had the Welsh and the English published by Parthian Books on the same day, which had never been done before. And it was just so interesting to have this very, very bilingual book, which sort of very much suited how Wales is as a country.
That's so interesting. It just does, doesn't it? Because it's not everybody in Wales speaks English as well. So you never, like, even in your most pure Welsh communities, it's not cut and dry, is it?
No, exactly. Yeah, that's something, again, when I went to university, realising how I had to change the way I spoke. Because speaking to English people, I sort of didn't realise how often I generally used Welsh words.
God. Yes, I had the same
experience. It's so funny, and I just had to really think. It was so confusing because English is my first language, and I thought, well, I'm speaking English. Why is this difficult? Why am I having to think this through? And then realising I actually speak sort of like a Wenglish sort of thing, because it's just all around you. You don't realise that you don't speak this sort of pure English, that you don't speak England's English, I suppose.
Absolutely, you don't. Because I like, my Welsh is not very good at all, so like I've never, but the same feeling of sort of like just your sort of colloquial idioms, isn't it, that you would use, like ychydig or mae'n entwpl.
Exactly, it's all these little things. And the funniest for me was when I had to try and explain what an Eisteddfod was. I thought, I think you should look it up yourself. I'm not quite sure I can explain this. Sort of like, there's some druids and poetry and a big wooden chair, but it's so important. It's so important to Welsh culture. But I can't do it justice by just explaining, like describing what it is. So, yeah, it was strange.
Do you have any other favourite Welsh women writers other than Alice Conrad?
Yeah, absolutely. Charlotte Williams, excellent. She's a professor of sociology, and she wrote Sugar and Slate, which came out a few years ago. And it's set in North Wales, which is definitely something that I do not, before I read these books, didn't really have much of a perception of the differences between South Wales and North Wales, because even as we talk about Wales not being portrayed that often, when it's very much always South Wales, and very much even just Cardiff. Yeah. It's sort of this one specific place, and that is an excellent book. She writes about growing up in North Wales with her white Welsh mother and her father, who was from Guyana. And then I was going to talk about Pidgin originally, And then talking about the language and the Wenglish made me think of, there's a bit in her novel In Sugar and Slate where she talks about in her own home they talk this mixture of English, Welsh and Guyanese Creole. So it's just all this language is so personal to each of these small pockets of Wales, and even just within one household you have your own specific language and different levels of Welsh and different levels of other languages that sort of all mix together.
Absolutely. And I don't know how known it is outside of Wales, but it's a very important aspect. I interned at the Welsh Assembly for a bit, and it gets brought up every other day that there is no motorway between North and South Wales. To drive from North to South Wales, it takes far longer than it should, and it is true, beautiful, absolutely stunning rolling hills and windy roads, but it's not a commute that's easy at all.
No, exactly. Yeah, and it's, even if you want to get the train down, you've got to go miles into England and then back to, and it's just difficult to get around Wales. So you do have these sort of very, I don't want to say isolated or divided, but sort of people talk a lot about the north-south divide in England, but we definitely have similar sorts of divides between South Wales and West Wales and North Wales, and there's definitely these different types of Wales, I suppose. But there is no homogenous Welshness.
A lesson that goes to almost any group, isn't it, in society? It's always homogenous from the outside and as soon as you get to the inside. Do you know of any Welsh publishers? Because I remember that we came across a few when we were working together last year, but I can't think of. I should have obviously done my research, but do you know of any off the top of my head? Your head.
So there's I know in Pidgin there's Selling Books, which does a lot. They publish a lot of Emma Humphreys, and I know that they were I think they were at the Hay Festival quite a fair bit. They do a lot, which was wonderful to find out, because Pidgin is it's quite a sad town, to be honest. It's underfunded, and it's quite a grey place. But then to find out that hidden away there is one of the biggest publishers and the most important publishers in South Wales, all in Wales.
They're just in an attic as well, aren't they? They're literally in an attic.
They're fab. Yeah, and they're in an attic in Bridgend, and they're publishing Emma Humphreys and all of these brilliant, important works, by Gwyneth Lewis as well. First National Poet of Wales, Gwyneth Lewis, who wrote the writing that's across the Wales Millennium Centre. Yeah, she wrote that. She wrote a book about Blodeuwedd as well, which I studied. But
an interesting fact about the writing, if anyone doesn't know, across the Millennium Centre is not a translation. So most people presume that because it's in English and then in Welsh, it's not, but it's translated, but it's not. It was like a one work created for it.
That's so nice, and that's sort of goes back to what we were saying about it is a bilingual nation. And I think obviously this, but when it comes to translation, there's no language. There's no two languages that you can translate directly one from the other and it mean the same thing. So you just lose sort of the nuance. And I think that's one of the things about as I work towards being bilingual, understanding the differences in the way things are said and the way things are perceived in the world. There's the Mararid Hopwood, her Hay Festival, absolutely fantastic event, her Hay Festival event, where she talks about the sort of the differences in language and how in Welsh you don't say that you have something, it's with you, and it's just fascinating. I don't have the linguistic knowledge to get into that, but I did not know that, actually. That's a really good fact.
She did. I remember her, Mary Hotwood, doing this, and she had this book. Do you remember, the book of? And she had these white gloves, and she was amazing because she was just sort of standing. She was being so careful. I think it was an original text. But I remember she was getting lots of people from the festival to sign it, and was treating it as a very sacred object, and it was quite an interesting practice. To sort of raise these questions of identity and what it means to be Welsh and English and all of these kinds of things.
Yeah, absolutely. It was fascinating. But other publishers. There's Parthian Books, who did publish Pidgin. Honno as well. They publish specifically Welsh women's writing, and they're sort of one. They're like, I've completely forgotten the Virago Classics. They're like them, that they specifically try and find Welsh writers who, new Welsh writers, but also Welsh female writers who have been forgotten, or just, for various sexist and anti-Welsh, whatever reasons, just haven't had their works published as they should. So they're excellent. And that's, I think, Honno can't really translate the word exactly, but it's sort of, it references women. It's sort of the word this, but specifically for women. I do not have the linguistic skills to explain that, but then that's another. It's quite nice having words that can't translate exactly and that means something really to you, sort of like hiraeth and things like that. It's quite nice to have these words that just belong to your culture. Does that make sense?
I couldn't agree more. Would you like to mention any other female writers, or is there anything else you'd like to add in particular that I might have missed out in my
I'm just trying to think now. There's get my list. One moment. There is a wonderful, I believe, short story collection, That's Love. Sorry, I don't have any of my books with me because I'm locked down elsewhere. I don't have any of my books with me and I'm trying to do this. Found the name. Leonora Britta, she wrote That's Love, collection of short stories. And there's also Trezor Azzopardi. She wrote, she's a very Cardiff based writer, and I believe it was In and Out of the Goldfish Bowl, which she wrote. And sort of Cardiff is such a specific, complex place when it comes, what we were saying before about, have these sort of pockets of different kinds of Wales, and Cardiff is just, it's an incredibly diverse city, but it's also one of the most anglicised cities in Wales. But it's still, it's the capital city of Wales. So there's just so much going on there that they really get into. And Patience Agbabi here as well. Wonderful writers who really get into sort of the complexities of Welsh identity and what it is to be a Welsh woman in a country that is often so portrayed as male. I was saying to you before, I felt a bit of whenever I talk about these things, I feel a bit of a fraud because I'm not fluent in Welsh, but I'm trying. It wasn't my choice to grow up in speaking English. So I think just sort of accepting all of the different identities and complexities there are when it comes to language in Wales. There is no right way to speak in Welsh or Wenglish or however you speak in it.
When I was growing up, I really enjoyed. Did you ever read Jenny Nimmo?
Oh, I recognise them. I know who that is. I do recognise that.
Actually, sorry, I think they're just on this bookcase in the hallway. We'll literally grab them. Here they are. We've got Charlie Bone, Jenny Nimmo. So, I'll start with these ones. These weren't particularly Welsh, but this is her big series.
I know, yeah, I do know those, yeah.
And then these, on the other hand, are very, very Welsh, which are The Snow Spider, and it's a series of, I'll just read the back maybe. It's basically about a magician called Gwyn, and it's, if you're looking for children's, they were amazing, and she had these ones that I loved, that were about it had Taliesin in it, and there was this girl who went back in time to it was really, really good. It was one of those things where it was such a small publisher though. I'm not sure if it ever, I don't even know if it exists. If it does exist, I'll link it below. But yeah, I was wondering what children's books, what sort of, did you ever come across Wales in children's literature?
Oh gosh, that's such a good question. I know, because I work part-time in the shop in the National Museum in in Cardiff, and we do sell a lot of Welsh children's books, and I think some of them are, I think we might actually sell the Snow Spider, and there are just different things that we sell, but a lot of the time it is, you know, sort of just things that are published in English and in Welsh, which gets some people quite annoyed sometimes. I have had people complain about the Welsh being on leaflets. I had a customer complain to me that they picked up a leaflet and it was, you know, obviously Welsh on one side, English on the other, as everything in Wales is. And he picked it up and then turned to everyone, oh, finally I can found a language I can read it in. And I thought, you know, you're in Wales, you're in the National Museum of Wales, and you're surprised and annoyed that there's Welsh. And he went, oh, it's a dead language, you know, no one speaks it. So I just went, oh, well, you know, dwi'n siarad Gymraeg. And he just walked off. But you know, actually, my knowledge of Welsh children's books isn't that great. I know that I've got a couple of editions of the Mabinogi for children, and they really have to be edited quite a fair bit. It's sort of like when you look at the original, like Hans Christian Andersen or Grimm Brothers fairy tales compared to sort of the Disney ones and the modern ones, it's that sort of needing to make them, even though originally potentially the Mabinogi was written for children, we've no idea. But yeah, they need sort of editing down to be a bit more child friendly. How is it? My knowledge, that's actually sort of just twigged something in my head that I don't have much of a sort of Welsh children's writing. I know it's out there. Sort of Child's Christmas in Wales, sort of a lot of the Dylan Thomas writing, beautiful book. One that I do like, The Owl Service, but I wrote a lot in criticism of it because it was written by Alan Garner, and it's about the Mabinogi, and it's about the sort of spirit of Blodeuwedd is reawakened in this valley in Wales. But it's quite problematic in the way it's portrayed. It's sort of these English people have come on holiday to this Welsh valley and they've rediscovered this Welsh history and this Welsh culture that the Welsh people don't really understand. And it's very difficult because you can tell that Garner really, really loves the Mabinogi and these characters, but seems to think he loves them more than Welsh people. You know, there's he wrote that he said that as soon as the first time he heard the Welsh language, it felt like it was mine. And I thought, oh, you know, there's a way of loving and appreciating something without, you know, appropriating it and taking it for your own, and sort of, yeah, it is a great book, but throughout it there are parts where you just think, you know, he wishes it were English, if that makes sense, that he just doesn't quite like the Welshness of this Welsh story.
There has been it's like a lot of not academic focus, but like obviously J.R.R. Tolkien loved the Welsh language too, so he was obsessed with languages, as everyone talks about, and like, Elvish has loads of similarities. So it's interesting that there can be this
Tolkien does it well. Tolkien appreciated and really loved the Welsh language, and I think he was a lecturer in Welsh actually. He really, really loved it, but no, never sort of tried to claim it or morph it into something else. You know, he just incorporated it into his stories. So yeah. Tolkien's how to do it properly.
There is a story about a Welsh guy who discovered America before Christopher, discovered obviously in quotation marks, like visited America before Christopher Columbus, and his name was Madoc, and it's sort of like this Welsh legend also, because there was some elements of maybe potentially Welsh speaking communities when like people started really going to the American continent and colonizing it. Also, if you didn't know, the only other place in the world that speaks Welsh is Patagonia, right at the southern tip of the South American continent, because Wales tried to colonize.
Well, they were sort of told that it was going to be, you know, just basically a hot Wales, that the weather's going to be beautiful and there's going to be, you know, lush green rolling fields, and they got there and it was desert. You know, but they sort of I cannot for the life of me remember the tribe who lived there, but they really welcomed them and helped them and taught them how to plough the land and grow things there. And it's such a complicated history, because people sort of say, you know, oh, it's the only British colony that wasn't created through violence. I thought, okay, right, still a colony, still so many issues there when it comes to colonization. And what you're talking about, Madog, the, you know, people are saying, oh, well, there's this Native American tribe and they've got, you know, Welsh language in their language. And then people will interview these people and they go, well, we don't really want you to stop trying to claim our language. That's not, you know, it's so complicated when it comes to Wales as Britain and Wales as part of the British Empire. It's just incredibly complex, and I think people don't really want to accept the role Wales played.
Often Wales can sort of say, well, we're a colony, we've been colonised by the English, and that we sort of see ourselves, like the country, as having faced injustice, but that really our role is, I would say that our role in harming and colonising other places is not something that we speak about as a culture, and should be much more prevalent in our understanding of our responsibility to the world.
That's just reminded me of, I believe it was I can't remember the author, but there's a book, The Welsh Extremists, and the author talks about how when any Welsh person was part of, you know, the atrocities of the British Empire, that was them acting as British people, but not as Welsh people. And as Welsh people, they are an oppressed colony. And I thought, you can't wash your hands of things like that to try and, you know, assuage your guilt that you feel being part of Britain. And it's just really interesting because a lot of Welsh surnames are sort of littered throughout North America. And in Sugar and Slate by Charlotte Williams, she talks about going to Guyana and going to different countries in both Africa and in America, and meeting these people with these Welsh surnames, and she sort of feels a connection from her, you know, her Welsh home to these countries. And then you sort of realise that actually the reason why these people have Welsh surnames is because of slavery, and because of the roles that Welsh people played in slavery and were owning people who were enslaved, which, you know, it's so complex, and there's no clear way to cut it. I think that people need to, it's so difficult. People need to stop viewing Wales in one way, like what we were saying before. There is no homogenous Welsh identity, and that also is part of, you can't just say that Wales wasn't involved in all of these horrific things.
And it's actually a reflection of things we don't like other people saying about Wales. Like, we don't like people being like, you're a small country who doesn't matter. Like, these things might be true on a global scale, but, you know, like, we don't like, sort of, it's something definitely that Wales has very strongly reacted against, sort of being like, no, like, we matter, our culture matters, our language matters, it doesn't matter that we're small, it doesn't matter. But like, then all of a sudden when we talk about empire, it's like, oh, well, we're small, like, we played a really small role, like, not that many people can be involved, like, I'm sure it was, you know, it really, all the power was in Westminster, don't know what you mean. So it's like, we can't have one without having the other.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's still I was talking to someone recently about the race riots in Cardiff in 1919, where there's horrific, you know, people of colour being attacked and sort of hunted down because they might have been in relationships with white women, and then talking to someone about it and saying, yeah, but they weren't as bad as the race riots in England. You can't, that's not the point. That is just, you can't keep defending the role Wales played while still trying to, you know, establish this Wales on the world stage. So yeah, it's incredibly complex and very frustrating.
Yeah. And I think that's a good place to end it, because I think this is the conversation going forward, isn't it? Like, this
absolutely.
we want to be having ourselves, and want to be encouraging everyone to have with their friends and family.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you again,